Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Unhelpful perfectionism or clinical perfectionism is characterized by imposing excessively high standards on oneself and experiencing severe distress when these standards are not met. Hello everybody, thank you so much for tuning in into another episode of the Playing It Safe podcast. This is Dr. Z, and today I am excited to share with you a conversation I had with Dr. Michael Tui, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Research Group. Mike is a licensed psychologist, and he's also the co-director of the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Research Group at Utah State University. In this conversation, we chat in detail about one of the studies his lab conducted, delivering 10 sessions of acceptance and commitment skills for unhelpful perfectionists. Participants in this study completed assessments before the treatment, after the treatment, and 1 month after the treatment ends. So basically, there were assessments pre-treatment, post-treatment, and 1 month follow-up. On a personal note, a highlight of this conversation with Michael was chatting about how many times people who engage in perfectionistic, high-achieving, and striving behaviors hold with white knuckles onto rules about how things are supposed to be, and how different act metaphors can be super helpful to navigate those moments. I want to encourage you to listen to this episode from the beginning to the end, so you can listen to Mike's favorite metaphors to facilitate behavioral change and promote behavioral flexibility. I would love to hear how perfectionistic, high-achieving, and striving behaviors show up in your day-to-day life. So please message me at www.thisisdrz.com. On another note, if you want to figure out your playing it safe profile, if you want to figure out how you get stuck in your head every time you're dealing with worries, anxieties, and fears, please go to the website www.thisisdrz.com, and you can complete a 10-minute questionnaire to figure out which thinking strategies keep you stuck in your head. In my work, I have identified 10 particular thinking strategies and behaviors that keep you stuck. And the challenge is that if you don't know how you're playing it safe and you keep doing the same thing over and over, you are going to perpetuate a cycle of stuckness. And I do believe that it doesn't have to be that way. So the first step to stop playing it safe all the time and do more of what really matters to you is to figure out your playing it safe profile. Once you complete this 10-minute questionnaire, in less than 5 minutes, you will receive an email with the results and the specific thinking strategies and behaviors that are keeping you stuck. We all play it safe. It's very cozy, it's very familiar, and it feels good to play it safe. Sometimes it can be adaptive. But what happens when you play it safe too much, too quick, and you don't pay attention to how those behaviors are working in your life? Are your playing it safe moves working for you or against you? So Again, the website is www.thisisdrz.com. If you go to the homepage, you will see a link to complete this questionnaire, and I hope you do so. I wish you a great week, and let's jump onto the conversation with Michael Tui. I know that you and Clarissa conducted a previous research, and in fact, in front of me, I have one of your papers. It's a paper that got published in 2019.
Okay.
The results of a randomized controlled trial of acceptance and commitment therapy for clinical perfectionism.
Right.
And I would love to hear, how was that research conducted? How did you find the participants? I know the participants received a 10-week treatment based on that, acceptance and commitment therapy. So if we can dive into what the sessions look and the skills that the participants learn, that will be lovely. How does it sound?
Okay, so I'll try to go step by step. So the first is we received a grant from the International OCD Foundation to study clinical perfectionism using acceptance and commitment therapy. So that was the first thing. And Clarissa, who was my PhD student at the time, we talked about, should you make this your dissertation? Kind of get a twofer out of this thing, like complete the project, but also she could be the leader, and then it would count as her dissertation. And I just think an interesting thing is, like, if you know Clarissa, I mean, I honestly think she's one of the best researchers out there. You know, she did this real cool, like, multi-step thing. Like, we had like neurological assessments using the F-NEARS. It's like an fMRI, but on a low scale. So like we did functional neuro assessments at pre and at post to see if there's any change. And the cool thing about the F-NEARS is, like, you can do it while the person is doing tasks. So we had all these like interesting tasks that they could do that would challenge perfectionism. So we could see like areas of the brain lighting up that go along with struggles with perfectionism.
Mike, can I ask one question? Yeah. What would be one of the tasks the participants were doing?
You know, okay.
If you remember, no pressure at all.
Well, here's the funny thing. I know we don't have video, but I just brought home scratch paper from my office.
I love it.
And it's all scratch paper from the study. So like,
oh wow,
like this one it's a star
with fire.
Right, and then it has an open, part where you can trace the star, and then we had them do it with their non-dominant hand.
Okay.
Right, so it's like the person would like it to fit within, but then obviously your non-dominant hand isn't as skilled. So what we're tracking is like there's a region, I think, that had to do with like frustration, and then it's very easy to tap into like cognitive chatter. That region's pretty easy to find. Where was the person talking to themselves? And that was one of the things we found, that like at the end of treatment they talk to themselves less.
Wow.
Right, which is kind of cool from an ACT standpoint. Here's like another one where they are editing text.
That's right.
And it's just all stuff that sort of challenged their perfectionism, and we got the tasks from other people. Actually, when I said they traced it with their non-dominant hand, I don't actually think that's right. I think they traced it in a mirror.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's actually what they did. And if I can compliment Clarissa again, she had to go like build the contraption to do it in. I remember that she like went to a wood shop and made this device with a mirror that you could slide your hand under, and you can only see in the mirror. Yeah.
That's fascinating. You see, I didn't know that there was that measurement on the study. That's really cool.
Right. Those are like different publications from the study, like the neuromechanisms involved in perfectionism and in ACT for perfectionism.
So the participants have to complete these assessments. And then once the participants are accepted into this treatment, into this study, they receive 10 sessions. Do you mind sharing a little bit what kind of skills participants learn?
Okay. Well, one of the key things with the whole study, and I think we dove into it quite early, and this is what kind of makes it different than the treatment of like obsessive compulsive disorder or other anxiety disorders, is our flyers that we put on campus and online. And because these people we saw in person, this was pre-COVID, so we were in the same room with them. It said, do you have trouble turning things in on time? Do your tasks take longer than other people? Do you redo things? Are you getting poor grades for not completing your assignments? Do people, like loved ones or roommates, do you get frustrated with each other because you need things done a certain way? So our flyers didn't have the word perfectionism in them, because it feels like when you ask someone like, are you too perfectionistic? Very few will say yes.
That's true. That's true. People will say no. And also I think there is this myth that perfectionistic actions are related to academic performance, but there's more than that, right? Like how I show up to my friends, how I relate to moral issues. So that makes sense that we didn't use the word perfectionist on the flyers recruiting people.
Yes. So then we would get people in and they'd say, oh yes, I have these, like if I just think of like a general participant we would have saw, they'd say like, oh, I'm taking way more credits than I should be. I'm in every social group, every like campus group that I can fit into my schedule. I'm volunteering everywhere that I can, and I still am afraid I'm not doing enough. I'm not going to be good enough to get into whatever this thing is I want to do next. And then we'll say, well, then like you knew this was a treatment study, like we're going to work on these issues, then why are you here? And they're kind of like, well, I want you to help me do this, do more, be more successful, be greater, but not burn out. Because like I can't take it, you know, like I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm not eating well enough, I'm not socializing. You know, it's just like I'm a mouse on a wheel, and I'm running out of energy.
Sure.
Like that was kind of the description we would get from everybody.
I see. It's kind of like people are more focused in overcoming the consequences of all the perfectionistic actions, right? So they can keep pushing harder and harder.
Right. So we would have to spend a lot of time talking about, I would picture that we did this early, like we were talking about their values. Like, what are you really shooting for in life? What's working for you, not what's not working for you. And we'd almost like stay on those topics long enough that they would lead us, you know, that they'd lead us to saying like, it seems I need to do this differently. So it was like, I don't want to tell someone, you know, like this part of your life's not working for you. Like we would just stay on it long enough that they would eventually tell us, like, my classes take me 3 times longer than everyone else. I can't finish a chapter because I'm looking up every word I don't understand. And then, right, you look up that word and then there's more words, and it's like, I can't get through it. And we just sort of have to stay there until they're like, why can't I like do this faster or like easier? Like, why is it so hard for me? And then we could sort of approach this like concept of perfectionism. Like,
if I can ask a little bit, sometimes the clients that I work with, they are very clear about what's important to them, but they are relating to their values with a lot of attachment. They're relating to their values with a lot of rigidity. And then somehow one single task is the only way to live their values. How did you guys navigate that?
You're naming a great description of this. It's like, here's my value, here's the path to get to my value. And I'd often use analogies like, here's the road you always take. Like what I'm almost picturing is like when I lived in Milwaukee, you know, there was the highway, and that if you put it into like Google Maps, like that was the fastest way to get there. But if you lived in Milwaukee, that's not the case at all. The fastest way to get there is, right, like you go down this goofy street and then you connect to this one way for 4 blocks and then you shoot back over here. And that's actually, it's so much better, but no one would ever send you that way because it's weird. that's right. That's kind of what working with perfectionism, like your mind says go this way, but what if there's another route to help you get there that just seems strange to you, but like everyone in the city knows it's the better route. And that's it. Like, I'd say to a client, like, will you try a different way with me? And maybe this will work a lot better.
I love how you present the metaphors and how you tap into something that's very common, this strong attachment to the values in a more rigid way. And sometimes that also comes along with a strong attachment to the outcome. I need to get A's in all my papers. I need to go to the best school in the country. I need to always show up to my friends if they're struggling. How did you navigate that in that treatment?
I feel like when you were saying like that example of like, I must have A's, like I truly remember one of the clients said, I have in the US GPA system 4.0 is perfect. She said, I have a 3.9 something because I got an A- once. Right. Oh, and she looked at me and in all honesty, she said, should I retake that class?
Oh boy.
And, right. And I said, hey, I mean, like, first I'd say, like, what's behind you saying that? Like, what's in there for you? And some of it's like the discomfort of not having a 4.0 and what will people think of me that I couldn't do it in that one class? And then we talk about goals, like, what are your goals? And I don't actually know what her goal was. I don't remember. But like, let's say she's like, I want to become like an investment banker or something. I'd say something like, I do admissions for my graduate program. What do you think I prefer seeing, like a 3.9 or 4.0? Like, what do you think I'd actually think if you retook that class? Like, it just sometimes like these rules that we have in our head about these steps result in this outcome, that some of the rules that we have learned they're not accurate. It's just more like doing really, really well has its place. And then doing well enough has its place too.
That's true. I think there is a lot of rules that get developed. If I get A, then I will be successful. If I am loved by my friends, then everyone will love me and no one will abandon me, or things like that. And I love that you can teach participants how to discriminate. So you start with looking at what people want to get off the treatment, you tap into values, and then you see if there are other ways to live their values. But then, as we know, the mind keeps coming up with all types of things. In the book, you guys did a beautiful job talking about the coherence trap. And I'm curious, when you guys were conducting the study, how did you navigate through that?
Well, I mean, as you remember from the book, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% remembering what we mean by that, but is that sort of like, is this like the rule thing? Like these steps lead to this, and if I do it this way, it leads to this outcome.
That's right. And it became so natural that's the way that we think about getting things done, right? It's like alternative ways, they don't seem to make sense to us, especially if we are prone to high achieving or striving actions. So that's the way that you guys describe it.
Okay, yeah, like hard work results in good things, which is a somewhat functional rule and somewhat not functional rule. I mean, what stands out to me is like our mind aims to be our friend, and it aims to help us, but it's a friend that's not always right, or anyone who's a parent. It's like your mind at sometimes is a teenager, like they're giving you guidance, and it's good, but it's like not always fully thought out, or doesn't fully have all the experiences that might might be useful in that moment. So I think I would put out there the idea that like we can't always trust your mind. Like, it's trying the hardest it can, but it's not always going to give you good guidance. And what I do want you to pay attention to is pay attention to your experience, because you might be surprised that when you do things a different way, that you might actually get an outcome much like the one you want, or even like maybe a different outcome slightly better. And like, let's be open to that little bit of learning. And I'll usually use like some metaphor to help the person find that, like one of the metaphors I'll use a lot, and this, someone who's perfectionistic could really see this. I'll say, I'll go to restaurants and I'll say, give me the thing that you think a vegan would enjoy the most. And then, you know, the waiter might say like, oh, well, do you like spicy or, you know, sweet? And I'll be like, how about like, you just tell me, like, I don't even want to, after you give it to me, tell me what it is. Like, you just tell me. And that might make someone struggle, like a perfectionistic person, because it's like, oh, I know what I like. Why leave this up to chance?
Yeah.
That would be rough for you.
That would be rough for me. Yeah.
But what I find out when I do something like that is, I don't know, a third of the time, I'm just really surprised by how good it is, because I would have never allowed myself to go there. It didn't fit with my rules of what I like. And then 60% of the time, I know my math doesn't work, but you know, the other 2/3, it's not my favorite, but like, that's how you broaden your skill set. Like, force yourself to do something that you wouldn't normally do. And you'll be shocked at sometimes it like really opens up doors to doing it differently.
I love that you emphasize how important it is to learn from our experience. And that's, I think, the basis of doing ACT, right? Learning ACT skills, that we don't have to go along with our mind all the time, even though it's trying to protect us, but it's about giving ourselves permission to try new things, whether it's a new dish, a new biking route, and that's the biggest learnings for us. Mike, if I can ask a little bit more. So one of the processes within ACT that we talk up and down, left and right, is diffusion. How we relate to our thoughts. You chat a little bit about it. But for people who are listening to this conversation, and if they are struggling with striving behaviors, perfectionistic actions, or high achieving actions, what will be your advice for them about how to relate to all the noise that shows up in their mind? What if thoughts, if then rules, when then?
Thank you for that question. The thing that comes to my mind is like if you know your mind is not always as helpful as you'd like it to be, then when it says something to you, that it's probably better to treat that like, you know, like maybe a billboard that's like, have you tried the new Coca-Cola? You know, like, it doesn't mean you have to, but you know, maybe you would want to do that. Like, I don't know, that it's just like some information. Like sometimes I'll say, you know, like if you come up to a traffic light and you have the red, yellow, green, and sometimes at night they're flashing, right? It's like flashing yellow or flashing red. Why don't we have that in our town? It's like a flashing red's like a stop sign, a flashing yellow is like a yield. And I was like, maybe it's kind of like a flashing yellow or like a yield sign, which is like, hey, you should watch out here. You don't have to stop, but you know, just like be aware something's happening. That when your mind says, if you don't proofread that email before you send it to your boss, you might mess up. I don't know, like notice that your mind is saying that. And like if Patricia and I, you and I are really good friends. Like you've probably read enough of my emails over the years. My mind's probably the opposite. Like you should proofread that. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't really want to, right? And right. And here I am, a successful professor. I don't proofread emails. I just send them, and then I get them back, and I'm like, oh gosh, I can't believe I wrote that. But I could benefit from listening to my mind a little bit the other way, but also I will survive in this world just as well as someone who's proofreading it 3 times, and I'm going to have an extra 30 minutes.
I love that example.
But I will be known as the person who writes a few goofy emails here and there.
Which I absolutely love them, by the way. I do the same thing. I'm like, oops, what did I say? If I can ask a little bit more, I have a lot to say about this, but I'm not, because it's a tangent. I know that sometimes when people are learning to hold their mind lightly and to take things more as they come and to distinguish when to push harder and when to let things go,
yeah,
sometimes there is a lot of shame. Like you and I, we can send all types of emails sometimes, and my emails have many typos hundreds of times. I may write in Spanglish other times.
yeah.
And sometimes when I look back, I say, oops, I can't believe it, I sent that, just like your mind. But I don't go into punishing myself for hours. I don't go into self-criticizing myself. Oh my gosh, my life is over. No one is going to take me serious. But I know it's after years of learning act. So for people who are engaging in perfectionistic actions, if they encounter mistakes, typos, flaws, sometimes they go into these states of harsh self-criticism.
Right.
Did you guys encounter that in the study? And what would you suggest for some of them that's another way in which they get trapped in their minds?
That is a really, really wonderful question, because you're right. Sort of what you're saying is like, why can one person see whatever it is and and it's like you just breeze right past it, right?
Right.
And then the next person can see that and it's like, what's wrong with me? Or I'm picturing like I'm a supervisor of graduate students. If one of my grad students sent out something, that had some typos in it, that I could see some advisor being like, what's wrong with that person? How do they not understand the importance of all this?
That's right.
This is a therapist line, not a scientist line. Our brains are a bit like a computer. Like they just do what they're programmed to do. So if your programming says errors are bad, they show you're bad, they show you don't care, right? So then when they see one, they're just gonna spit out that response. And for me, it's like, well, errors mean the person's moving fast. Errors mean the person has better things to do with their time. That's what my computer is going to spit out. And probably the thing is like, neither one's right. Like, just like recognize that like we have a history of learning that led us to do what we're going to do. And that when we like evaluate and judge things, like to take all that lightly. It's funny as I say this, because like I have this, like I'm okay with errors, but I get bothered when people don't do what they said they're going to do. Or right, like if I send an email to a colleague I like someone I know, like that I would consider a friend, and they don't write back, like I have this like, what's up with that? Like you don't have 1 minute to. But it's funny as I say this out loud, why do I grab onto that billboard as though it's real? Like that's just my programming. I don't know if anyone knows like Wisconsin heritage, which is timeliness. It's very German. I think I can say that. Wisconsin's very German. Like you be on time. You do things when you say you're going to do them. Like if the party starts at 10, it starts at 10. Like all that kind of stuff. And that's just my programming, probably. That like. So if you can recognize it's not real, it's not right, it's just like what your computer spits out, then you don't always have to listen to it.
Yeah, I think you're making a fascinating point. At the end, it's all about getting out of this dichotomous or binary way of looking at our mind of good and bad, right and wrong, and developing this new relationship with thinking in some way.
Yeah. And then like instead of right and wrong, good and bad, it's more like a functional way that's going to work for you in life. It's like, what do you want? Where do you want to go? And what's going to help you get there? And again, your mind is going to do a crappy job of telling you whether you're going there, because it's always judging things wrong. So it's just like you truly have to look at your experience and say like, okay, well, here's what I wanted. Is it happening? It is. So mind, like, you can chill out now. Like,
That's right.
I wanted, like, as a psychologist, like, I wanted this many clients, and as a professor, I wanted to do these things. And if they're happening, well, then, mind, like, you can chill for a sec.
That's right. Sometimes I say, okay, I think I'm going to fire my mind for the next 1 hour.
Yeah.
What keeps going on, and I'm like, don't fire mind. It doesn't stop. Mike, if I can do a follow-up, you say living functionally.
Mm-hmm.
For people who are not familiar with that, how would you explain to our listeners what it means to say living functionally?
Yeah, maybe a way of thinking about it is sort of objectively looking at the outcomes, objectively looking at the situation or how things are going, minus what your mind is saying about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I have, like, here's an example. Like, I have another book, and in, like, the very first figure, there's like a very obvious word spelled wrong.
I haven't catched that yet.
Yeah, I think it's like so obvious that no one even reads it because we all know what word it is.
Okay.
So we just skip over it. And that's one of those, like, if you look at it like big picture, well, the book is out, it's there. If you go on Amazon, it has good reviews. Right. And that's like holding on to that versus what my mind says of, like, whose fault is it that figure got through?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And even like right now, my mind is like, well, that was a weird one, because, like, when we proofread, see, this is very mindy right now, but I'm still going to say it, but it's very like baloney, mindy stuff. The figures weren't in the proofs. So, like, they were like in a different thing. So I never looked at the figures again because they didn't come through.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, notice how much chatter my mind is having over that, when, like, functionally the other 350 pages are probably fine. And heck, there could even be more errors I just don't know about. It's kind of like that. Like I'm trying to think of other things I can say. Like, you see someone else who did more than you or earned more than you.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of have to look at it and say, well, like, what did I want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm doing what I wanted to do, then mind, like, it's okay that I'm not like that person.
Yeah. I think the way that I hear is that living functional also can be about learning from our experience, what works, what's meaningful, what's purposeful. Because at the end, skillfully navigating a proneness for high achieving behaviors requires that. Letting it go of what people expect from you, letting it go of all the things that you're supposed to be doing, and finding your thing, your rhythm to get things done, the things that they speak to you, right?
Yes. Well, if I can give, like, one example,
I would love to.
This one yesterday. So I'm a professor, and my semester ended a week or two ago. And weirdly, yesterday I had no meetings and I'm caught up.
Wow.
Right? So, like,
wow.
But the wording would be, if you keep working, that's how you'll do well.
Right.
Like, there's always something to do. I, like, did my email and then, like, hung out with my wife and just sort of, like, goofed around the rest of the day. But the whole time, the mind is saying, like, yeah, but you should be, like, getting ready for X, Y, and Z, or reading that paper that student sent you. And that's where I couldn't, like, my mind wanted me to go in one direction. But if I really looked at my experience, that taking the day off was fun, taking the day off improved the relationship with my wife, and, like, everything's fine. Like, it's like, my career is no different whether I worked yesterday or not.
That's true. And you only can learn that through experience, right? Not by thinking, but by doing it, right? That's the biggest thing. Yeah. So I think that's what we're talking a little bit, that living functionally in some ways about letting it go of especially rules or oaths or masks or things that we're supposed to do or what others expect us that we should do, and find what works for us. But we won't learn that by thinking, but by taking action, by doing.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Dear Mike, we're running out of time. I have to say that it was really exciting to read the papers that you guys publish in your lab on perfectionism. I know it's really hard to put these studies together.
Yeah.
So tons of appreciation for all the hard work you and your doctoral students are doing. One of the things that really caught my attention among many is the outcomes that you guys had with this study. They are just really, I think, very fascinating. And I'm wondering if you could please elaborate a little bit on that. They have pre and post treatment, and you also had follow-ups. If you have to summarize the findings in the post treatment and the follow-ups, that would be lovely.
You're putting me a little to task because I'd probably want to pull the paper up in front of me. So it's a good one to ask Clarissa too. So, one of the things that's interesting about this study is like we had to measure like an outcome variable is going to be like level of perfectionism. But we had people with kind of across 3 different disorders. So we had OCD, GAD, OCPD. They were kind of our big, and if you're in the field, you know what all those initials mean, but they're psychological issues that could have a similar underlying function, but are like, they don't show up the same way. And I'd say one thing that was interesting is we were able to impact perfectionism and increase quality of life across all those things using this one protocol.
Wow.
Which that's one of the things that I think was like particularly nice, that like if what you're working with has perfectionism, this would fit. And then I don't actually know this for a fact, you could ask her, but Clarissa, I wonder if we even had people with OCD, who tried to enroll but weren't high in perfectionism. Like that's ultimately the thing that we needed in our study.
Fascinating. So you saw a shift on the results for all participants, whether they had chronic worry, generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're all in the treatment
really cool
group, but yeah, it was kind of a cool, like, kind of transdiagnostic approach. Like, we addressed perfectionism, not a disorder.
That's right. If I can ask a little bit more, there is this other measurement, the OQ45.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing a little bit of findings from that?
Yeah. So, obviously perfectionism would be like what I would say probably the primary target. But the OQ45 is this common measure people use in outpatient clinics. So if you're like a college counseling center where you have all sorts of issues coming through, and it just gets at functioning. So like all levels of life functioning, jobs, relationships, whatever. So we would want that to go up too. So as perfectionism adjusts, so does your functioning.
And then lastly, there is also another measurement, the AAQ2, which relates to the ACT processes. Any observations? All the measurements have been statistically significant based on the paper, but any observations of the results of the AAQ2?
Yeah, so, and this would be a great question to ask Clarissa, because I think there's a process of change paper, but that, changes in the AAQ, which is psychological flexibility, which are all the topics we've been talking about, that changes in that are related to later changes in how someone interacts with their perfectionism. And Clarissa has a great cross-sectional paper. Cross-sectional just means like at one time point. And actually, when I say it may have 2 time points, but the function of the paper is to say, it's not whether you have perfectionistic beliefs, but it's how you interact with them that predicts, sort of good functioning in life or not. So I think in terms of our outcomes, and then that additional paper I'm talking about, that it's not really whether you like being perfectionistic or it's a style you have. It's like what you do with it when it's there, and can you choose when to listen to it and when not to.
That's powerful. That is very powerful. And on that note, can I ask the last question? Mike, if you were to have a cup of tea or coffee or a beer with any person you want today, who will that be and why?
Who would that be?
And there is no perfect response here.
Yeah, I think, if I had to pick really quickly, there's a I said mountain biker. He's a pro road cyclist, Alex Hawes. He lives in Boulder, and he's actually like not all that famous. Like he's won some races here and there. But I don't really see a time in life when I'd ever get to talk to him. But he's just cool and he's interesting, and I've always liked the way he's done things, and he's sort of been, like a basketball player might watch LeBron James their whole career and be like LeBron James. Alex Hawes has always been someone I've just been like, that guy's so cool. So anyways, I'd love to hear what it's like if you don't know, I'm really into cycling, to hear what it's like to be like a real pro and to have done the Tour de France and, like raced at that level. And I don't know, his personality sort of seems like mine.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I will check him out.
He's a goofball.
He's a goofball? Okay.
Yeah.
More reasons to check him out, of course. And as always, of course, I always appreciate your recommendations. I love them.
Oh, thanks.
Mike, thank you so much for the time, for chatting with me. And I hope I can bring you back in a couple of months again.
Okay. It was good to see you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!